Today we are going to see what would happen if the UFC had a PFL-like season for the heavyweights in UFC 4. For those of you that don't know, the PFL or Professional Fighting League is one of the newest big competitors with the UFC. But the thing is, they aren't just another copy and paste MMA organization. The major difference is that they have seasons that are structured more like a soccer league. They have 10 fighters in each weight class. Each man or woman fights twice per season. They're given 3 points for a win, 1 for a draw, and 0 for a loss. But on top of that, they're given bonus points for finishing a fight inside the distance. 3 extra points for the first round, 2 for the second, and 1 for the third. So no matter who's fighting, each fight matters, and there's a large incentive for finishing with a knockout or a submission. At the end of the season, the 4 fighters with the most points advance to the playoffs, with only the championship being a 5-round fight, where the winner from each division takes home $1 million. I chose the heavyweight division because it seems like my best bet at having the most knockouts, and UFC 4 currently has the top 8 fighters in the heavyweight division. Also joining them will be Rosen and Derek Lewis. I'm not quite sure how they come up with the matchups for the PFL season, but here's how I decided to do it. I put my 10 heavyweights onto a wheel of names, and starting with Jon Jones, the wheel will randomly decide his first matchup, and we'll continue this trend until we have our first card of 5 scheduled fights. After the first card is completed, we'll do this again, but starting with the fighter that is in first place in points, and there will be no repeated matchups. So Jon Jones will be facing Alexander Volkov, Cyril Gane will take on Stipe Miocic, which is unfortunate for whoever loses that. Sergey Pavlovich will go against Tom Aspinall. Curtis Blaydes will face Tuivasa, which leaves us with Rosen versus Derek Lewis. Every fight will be controlled by the computers on pro difficulty, and like I said earlier, every fight until the championship will be 3 rounds and on real time. The first fight of the season is sort of a doppelganger matchup featuring the 2 lowest ranking fighters coming into this. Just like I expected, these big boys came out the gates swinging. Derek Lewis was looking to put this one away in the first round. He had the first 3 big strikes of the fight, but within the last minute of the first, Rosen came back with 2 high kicks in a row. In the second, Derek Lewis stunned Rosen again with his hands, but he couldn't finish in time. Rosen ended up recovering and then some. Derek Lewis has fallen and he can't get up. Somehow building 7 just collapsed again, and Rosen is the first man on the scoreboard with a second round knockout that gives him 5 points, and he moves up to first place. Next up is one of the best wrestlers in the division, Curtis Blaydes, versus the dad bod with steel fists, Tuivasa. It wasn't a super exciting first round. Blaydes took Tuivasa down in the first minute and only let him back up with 5 seconds remaining in the round. Second round, Blaydes takes him down, but Tuivasa does get back up, only to get dropped to the canvas. It could be related to the hundreds of tiny strikes he's been taking to his head off his back. Tuivasa finally gets his first big strike in the fight, but Blaydes recovers and drops him once again. Tuivasa gave him a big shot to the belly. Blaydes wasn't feeling that, so he went back to wrestling. In the third round, we get a few more takedowns from Blaydes. He almost finishes Tuivasa in the final seconds, but it wasn't enough to take him out. Blaydes dominated that fight. He won unanimously, but that only gives him 3 points. He can very well go on to win his next fight and still not make the playoffs at this rate. The third fight of the night is Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall. I love that Sergey is actually in this game now, but I hate how they have his AI fighting. They turned him into a wrestler, even though he's never won by a submission and he has an 84-inch reach. And this couldn't have been any better for Tom Aspinall. Sergey has a huge power advantage on his feet, but he kept wanting to go down on him. Tom Aspinall's a good-looking man, but that is not a good game plan. Sergey was submitted in the third round. Tom Aspinall just won a tough fight thanks to bad coding. He's moving up to second place with 4 points. Our second to last fight of the card is Jon Jones versus Alexander Volkov. Volkov is one of the lowest ranking fighters here, but size tends to matter in this game. Jon Jones still went out there and dominated the first round on the feet and the ground. In the second, Volkov had a chance to finish the fight, but he opted for a disrespectful grounded liver kick. Volkov continued to tear up Jon Jones on his feet, but Jon took him down and almost tore off his arm like he was a pregnant woman driving in Albuquerque. Jon Jones won in the third round, so he passed Blaydes on the scoreboard and is tied with Aspinall with 4 points. And the last fight of the first card, Cyril Gane versus Stipe Miocic. I'd love to see it happen in real life, but it's a rough start for whichever top 3 heavyweight loses this one. Gane draws first blood with the left hook, so Stipe tries for a takedown, but Gane counters. Miocic got back up and got some good hits in, but it came at a price. In the second, Gane was tearing him apart on his feet, and in the third, Miocic's leg was about to give out. Thankfully, he'll be able to walk another day, but when it comes to eating solid foods, that's a whole other conversation. He was knocked out cold in the third round, which means Gane is the third fighter to finish their fight with 4 points. Blaydes dominated his first matchup, but now he has no room for error in the second card, and the score to beat is Rosen 5 points, which also means he'll have dibs on the wheel to determine who he will be fighting next. But that didn't work out too well for him. He'll have to face Jon Jones on the second card. Tom Aspinall didn't have a great performance his first time out, and he'll have another tough guy on his hands in Stipe Miocic. Cyril Gane will be taking on Derek Lewis, which can either be a really easy fight for him or it can be his last fight. Curtis Blaydes will be taking on Sergey Pavlovich, which supposedly will be a wrestling clinic, and that leaves us with Alexander Volkov versus Tuivasa. Entering their last fight of the regular season, Volkov and Tuivasa both have 0 points, so ideally someone will be getting carried out in a stretcher in this one within 10 minutes. Tuivasa still has an iron chin, but it seems Volkov has those Russian steroids that don't show up on a drug test. He was piecing him up in the first round. Volkov almost had him out of here in the first round, but again, his strategy for finishing a fight is throwing body kicks with his opponent laying on the ground. In the second, Tuivasa still can't do anything right, but to be fair, Volkov doesn't seem interested in finishing the fight. He keeps letting him up, which doesn't seem like a good strategy until he flash KOs him. And finally, he hits his opponent on the ground, although he waited until he was unconscious. That just gave Volkov 5 points. And that makes things a little bit more interesting because at the moment he is tied for first place. Next up is Gane versus Lewis. Gane won himself 4 points in his first matchup, so he really just needs a win to get to the playoffs, but you never know. And Derek Lewis, like always, he needs a swing for the fences. I think Gane got the memo mixed up here because he almost won the fight in record time with a flying knee.
Strikers, any chance? Oh, big knee!
Besides that, there wasn't much action in the first round, which means there's a very good chance Derek Lewis is now out of the playoff race, but that doesn't stop him from trying to sabotage Gane's future. It's likely tied up going into the third. Gane just needs to play it safe and get the victory at this point. They're both getting some pretty good shots in, but Lewis's cardio and gut shield is breaking down. They look like they were going to go kick for kick here. Never mind that. That gives Gane another 4 points for a total of 8, and he has already secured himself a spot in the playoffs. Next up is Curtis Blaydes versus Sergey Pavlovich. Blaydes is the lowest scorer of the winners from the first round, so he could really use an early finish, and Sergey really needs an early knockout. Blaydes went for a takedown in the first 30 seconds, but Sergey counters it just for Blaydes to get back on top later, deliver a few hundred small blows. He also slammed him, but that was pretty much the first round. The UFC hates Russians. Sergey goes for the takedown. Blaydes gets on top, and he beats a defenseless Sergey half to death. That gives Blaydes 5 more points for a total of 8, tying Gane in points, but Gane deserves to be on top thanks to tiebreakers, particularly Gane's 2 finishes to Blaydes' 1. Our second to last fight of the regular season is Tom Aspinall versus Stipe Miocic. All Aspinall needs is a decision victory to clinch himself a playoff spot. Miocic, on the other hand, needs a first round finish or a second round finish with tiebreakers. Aspinall goes for an overpowered armbar to start the first round and keeps Miocic on the ground for a while. He even goes for a submission that requires him to put his anus in Miocic's face, but Miocic perseveres. This fight goes to the third round, so Miocic is only fighting for pride and ruining Aspinall's playoff chances at this point. Aspinall keeps going for the takedowns, but early in the third, Miocic drops him and nearly finishes him off a couple times. It ends up going the distance, which will have a huge effect on the playoffs, but the victory goes to Miocic, who finally gets on the scoreboard. It wasn't enough to advance him to the playoffs, but it was enough to keep another wrestler out of it, so that's a job well done. He held Aspinall to 2 for 21 on his takedown attempts, and the last fight of the regular season has big playoff implications. It's Rosenstrike versus Jon Jones. Whoever wins is guaranteed a spot, but if Rosenstrike loses, he will not make the playoffs due to tiebreakers with Volkov. In the first round, Rosenstrike makes it clear that at least in this game, he's able to stand with Jon Jones, and he even has some takedown defense, which is just uppercutting him on the way in. He keeps gambling with the overhand right, and it keeps paying off. He ends up dropping Jones twice in a few seconds, but he makes the risk of going to the ground with him, which leads to him getting beaten in the face repeatedly, but he takes it like a man, or Jon Jones' wife, take your pick. Early in the second, Rosenstrike hits Jones with a big kick, which causes him to switch stances. Jon recovers and answers back with a barrage of punches, but it's Rosenstrike's uppercut that drops him. He follows him to the ground again, which is a risky decision, but he stays in the fight. Jon continues to show off his overpowered takedowns, but Rosenstrike isn't interested in cuddling with another sweaty man. They take a second to catch their breath here. Jon Jones does a line and goes at him, but Rosenstrike drops him with a right and follows up with the left for the dead homies. Jon Jones does not make the playoffs after only going 1-1. Rosenstrike not only makes the playoffs, but finishes in first place with 10 points, meaning he will have a much easier first round matchup against Alexander Volkov, while Ciryl Gane and Curtis Blaydes will have to sort out their differences on the other side of the playoffs. The point system is thrown out the window now. It's all about winning by any means necessary from here on out. Rosenstrike and Volkov are are up first, and Rosenstrike knows he's playing with fire when it comes to Volkov's height and reach advantage. He gets him up close in his world, but it's Volkov's high kick that is the first major strike of the fight. They keep knocking each other to the ground, but on this side of the bracket, there's apparently a gentleman's agreement to not wrestle with each other whatsoever. Rosenstrike almost takes the victory after forcing Volkov to take a seat up against the cage, but late in the second, Volkov gets 2 consecutive knockdowns of his own, and in the last 15 seconds, Volkov goes for the clinch, but it's Rosenstrike with the right hook that drops him and turns him into a Muslim. Just a clean right hand up close. He might have even connected with the elbow. Then Volkov's face hits his own knee. He sends him into an immediate prayer, but that is not the time or place. We have a super even matchup on the other side. In UFC terms, we have the #1 contender Cyril Gane taking on the #4 contender Curtis Blades. Gane doesn't give Blades a chance to do some early wrestling until he almost knocks him out cold and falls for his game of possum. Blades follows this up by nearly beating Gane to a pulp. For better or worse, it gets to the point where we have a very rare referee stand-up, which of course leads to another takedown. Gane finally finds the answer to the takedown attempts.
Really picked up.
And after the 3 perfect takedown counters, he finally falls for it. He tries finishing the fight on the ground, and that did the opposite for Gane. He lays flat on his stomach and proceeds to get beaten unconscious. Blades is moving on to the finals to meet Rosenstrike in a 5-round fight. Rosenstrike has showed that he's not a big fan of wrestling, but he falls for the same old trick after dropping Blades in the first. He even applies pressure to the old pocket knives with his knee, but he still gets taken in and accepts his beating for the rest of the first round. Rosenstrike displayed some more takedown defense in the second and was probably winning the round, but Blades came up with a new strategy of nearly knocking Rosenstrike out and following him down to the mat. Rosenstrike gets up without the ref's help, which is a great sight to see, and he took him down again. They're still on the ground, but for the first time ever, Blades ends up in the bottom position and Rosenstrike gets some payback. Entering the championship rounds, Rosenstrike's cardio and face isn't looking good, but his hands are still open for business. He's on the brink of knocking him out, but Blades then drops him with a clean right. Both men are pushing their pixelated bodies to their limits. It's not taking much to drop either of them, and it's looking like anyone's fight. Rosenstrike started to look like a big black Rocky, but he knocks him down right in front of him, yet he's learned his lesson. He knows he needs to finish this fight with a clean knockout. With 1 minute left in the fourth, Blades gets his first takedown of the round, and Rosenstrike is too tired to get back up, so he lets his brain damage do the work for him. He accepts another beating and goes back to the stool covered in blood, sweat, and cum. It's the final round of the fight. It's been an absolute war, but Rosenstrike still doesn't want to glove touch. He dodges the punches from 5 feet away, and he is dropped. His cardio finally got the best of him, and Curtis Razor Blades is the PFL champion of UFC 4. Looking back at it, he even warned him about what punch he was going to throw twice before throwing it, and it still got him. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of how Blades fights in the game, but he's a solid fighter in real life, and realistically, he has one of the best shots of taking the title from Jones. His only losses are to Derek Lewis and Ngannou, so I also can't blame him for trying to wrestle all the time. I was skeptical myself about the PFL after only hearing about it from Jake Paul, but this league definitely has some potential. I love to see something different, and competition is always healthy, especially for the top dogs. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Lakers in 6, much love, and I will see you in the next one.